The galaxy had already decided Earth was next. Entire fleets mobilized. Commanders whispered strategies, confident no one could stop them. But humanity doesn't bow to fear. One message, sent from the heart of our world, rippled through every star system. Ships froze, councils trembled, and the galaxy realized Earth was not just another planet. Humans were a force no one dared underestimate. First contact protocol. The observation deck of the Krill. Empire's flagship was silent except for the steady hum of scanning equipment. High Commander Vex stood before the massive viewport, his forearms clasped behind his back as he studied the holographic projection rotating before him. The planet was blue and green, wrapped in swirling white clouds, orbiting a yellow star in the outer reaches of what the indigenous species called the Milky Way galaxy. Preliminary scans are complete. Commander, reported Science Officer Mira, her voice carrying the clinical detachment that came from cataloging hundreds of worlds. The planet designation is Earth. Carbon-based life forms, oxygen, nitrogen, atmosphere, abundant water resources. Population approximately 8 billion. Technology level is primitive, but advancing rapidly. They have achieved basic spaceflight and nuclear capability. Vex examined the data streams flowing across his command tablet. The information painted a familiar picture. Another world ripe for integration into the Krill Empire. Another species that would soon learn their place in the galactic order. The Krill had perfected this process over 3 centuries, bringing 63 star systems under their control through a combination of technological superiority and strategic intimidation. What is their military capability? Vex asked, though he already suspected the answer. Fragmented and disorganized, Mira replied. The planet is divided into 195 separate political entities. They maintain independent military forces that appear designed primarily for fighting each other, rather than external threats. No unified planetary defense system detected. Their most advanced weapons are fusion-based explosives, primitive compared to our plasma technology. Vex nodded slowly. It was the same story he had heard dozens of times before. These species always spent so much energy fighting among themselves that they never prepared for threats from beyond their own world. It made the Krill's work efficient, somewhat monotonous. Initiate standard first contact protocol, Vex ordered. Send the integration ultimatum. They have 48 hours to accept Krill authority or face pacification measures across the vast distance of space. On the planet Earth, Admiral Marcus Thorne sat in a bunker 300 meters below the surface of the Nevada desert. He was 61 years old, with silver hair and eyes that had seen too many classified briefings. Around him, dozens of technicians monitored screens that tracked every object moving through Earth's orbital space. This facility, known only as Site Omega, was the command center of humanity's most closely guarded secret, the Space Defense Initiative. For 40 years, Earth's major nations had maintained the public appearance of competition while secretly pooling resources for this moment. They had detected the first alien signals 3 decades ago. Since then, governments had diverted trillions of dollars into defensive preparations that the public never knew existed. Satellite networks that citizens believed were for communication actually housed weapons systems. Space stations described as scientific outposts or military installations. The entire infrastructure of Earth's orbital presence had been designed for one purpose: to be ready when they came. Sir, we're receiving a transmission, called out Lieutenant Sarah Chen from her station. It's using mathematical sequences for translation. They want us to understand them. Put it through, Thorne said quietly. The message appeared on screens throughout the command center. It was written in surprisingly clear English, translated by whatever advanced technology the aliens possessed. Thorne read it twice, feeling his jaw tighten with each word. The message identified the senders as the Krill Empire. It explained that Earth had been selected for integration into their civilization. Humanity would be required to dismantle all military forces, submit to Krill governance, and accept resource extraction quotas. Resistance would be considered a hostile act and would be met with overwhelming force. Earth had 48 hours to transmit acceptance or face the consequences. The command center erupted in controlled chaos. Officers spoke urgently into headsets. Data analysts pulled up every piece of information they had gathered on alien civilizations. Dorn let them work for 5 minutes before calling for silence. "Get me Dr. Rodriguez," he said, "and open a channel to the Global Security Council. It's time." Within 2 hours, representatives from every major nation on Earth were connected via secure holographic link. Generals argued for immediate military preparation. Politicians debated diplomatic approaches. Scientists discussed technological gaps. The conversation went in circles until Dr. Elena Rodriguez stood to speak. Rodriguez was 47 years old, a xenopsychologist who had spent her entire career preparing for this moment. She had studied every science fiction story, every philosophical text, every historical first contact scenario humanity had ever imagined. She had developed protocols for communication with species that might think in completely alien ways. Now she had 46 hours to put theory into practice. "We need to understand what we're dealing with," Rodriguez said, her voice cutting through the argument. "This ultimatum follows a pattern. They've done this before. Many times, probably. Which means they expect us to respond in predictable ways. Either we surrender immediately out of fear, or we make desperate threats we can't back up. Both responses confirm their assumption that we're primitive and easily controlled. What do you suggest?" asked General Morrison, commander of the United States Space Force. "We respond in a way they don't expect," Rodriguez said. "We tell them the truth. All of it." For the next 6 hours, Rodriguez and her team compiled a data package unlike anything the Krill had ever received. It contained detailed records of human history, but not the history of technological achievement or cultural accomplishments. Instead, it focused on something humanity knew better than any species in the galaxy. Conflict and resolution. The package documented over 15,000 wars fought throughout human history. It included casualty figures, economic costs, and social impacts. But more importantly, it included what came after. Peace treaties from ancient Sumeria to modern Geneva. Reconciliation programs that had transformed bitter enemies into allies. Post-war reconstruction that had rebuilt devastated nations. Truth and reconciliation commissions. International courts. Peacekeeping forces. Humanitarian aid organizations. The data showed how humans had fought the 30 Years' War and then created the concept of national sovereignty. How they had survived 2 world wars and then built the United Nations. How they had developed nuclear weapons capable of destroying their own planet and then established non-proliferation treaties. Every failure was documented alongside every success, but Rodriguez included something else. For every successful peace, she included records of failed attempts, broken treaties, resumed conflicts, cycles of violence that lasted generations. She showed the Krill exactly how much effort it took to maintain peace, even among humans who shared the same planet, the same biology, the same basic needs. And at the end of the data package, Rodriguez added a simple message written in clear, direct language. "We are sending you this information so you can make an informed decision. Conquering Earth is possible. Your technology is superior. But ruling Earth is different from conquering it. We know this because we have spent our entire history learning it. We have fought more wars than you can imagine, and we have learned that victory and success are not the same thing. We ask you to consider not whether you can defeat us, but whether ruling us would be worth the cost you would pay forever." Admiral Thorne reviewed the package 3 times before approving it. "This is either brilliant or insane," he said finally. "Possibly both," Rodriguez replied. "But conventional responses won't work. We can't outfight them, and we can't outnegotiate them if they're not interested in negotiation. Our only chance is to make them think. To make them see us as something other than just another primitive species to be absorbed. And if it doesn't work?" Rodriguez met his eyes steadily. "Then we fight anyway. But at least we'll have tried something new." The transmission left Earth at the speed of light. encoded with translation protocols that would allow the Krill to access every piece of information. As it raced toward the alien fleet, Admiral Thorne activated Earth's hidden defense network. Weapons platforms powered up across the orbital sphere. Ships that had been disguised as civilian craft changed their configurations. Soldiers moved into position at bases that officially didn't exist. Humanity hoped for peace, but prepared for war. It was, after all, what they did best. Understanding the enemy High Commander Vex stood in the analysis chamber of his flagship, surrounded by holographic displays that filled the air with glowing data streams. The human response had arrived 6 hours earlier, and his science team had been processing it ever since. What he expected to be a simple acceptance of Krill terms or desperate threats had turned into something far more complex. "Commander, you need to see this," Science Officer Mira said, her voice carrying an unusual tension. The data package they sent is enormous. It contains over 10,000 years of recorded history, but it's not what we anticipated. Vex moved closer to the central display, where a three-dimensional timeline rotated slowly, marked with thousands of red indicators. "What are these markers?" "Conflicts," Mira replied. "The humans have documented every war they have ever fought. There are over 15,000 separate conflicts listed here, ranging from small territorial disputes to planetary wars that killed millions of their people. Commander, they fought all of these wars against themselves." Vex felt his secondary hearts begin to beat faster, a biological response to confusion. That cannot be accurate. No species survives that level of internal conflict. They would have destroyed themselves long before achieving spaceflight. "That's what I thought too," Mira said, manipulating the holographic controls. "But the data is verified through multiple independent sources. Archaeological evidence, historical records, genetic analysis of population changes. It's all authentic. These humans have been fighting each other for their entire recorded history." Tactical Officer Kren approached from his station, his expression troubled. "Commander, I have been analyzing their military capabilities based on this historical data. Their weapons technology may be primitive compared to ours, but their strategic thinking is extraordinarily sophisticated. Look at this." Kren pulled up a series of battle analyses from human history. Vex watched as the displays showed conflicts fought across every type of terrain imaginable. Humans had fought in frozen wastelands, burning deserts, dense jungles, and deep oceans. They had developed tactics for urban warfare, guerrilla resistance, siege operations, and mobile warfare. They had created strategies for fighting enemies. With superior numbers, superior technology, and superior positions, they have been practicing warfare for 10,000 years, Kren said quietly. They have refined it, studied it, taught it in specialized schools. They have written thousands of books analyzing every aspect of combat. Commander, war is not something they do when they have no other choice. War is something they understand at a fundamental level. Vex felt a cold sensation spreading through his body. The Krill Empire had conquered 63 worlds, but every species they had faced had been fundamentally peaceful. They had small military, forces designed for defense against natural threats or minor disputes. None of them had spent thousands of years perfecting the art of destroying their own kind. "Continue the analysis," Vex ordered. "I want to understand what we are facing." Over the next 12 hours, Vex's team dissected the human data package. What they found disturbed them more with each discovery. The humans had not just fought wars. They had studied war with the same intensity that Krill scientists studied physics or biology. They had developed entire philosophies around conflict, strategies that went far beyond simple combat. Mira showed Vex something called asymmetric warfare, where weaker forces used unconventional tactics to defeat stronger enemies. She displayed records of insurgencies that had lasted for decades, wearing down occupying forces through endless small attacks. She revealed psychological warfare techniques designed to break enemy morale without firing a shot. She demonstrated information warfare strategies that could turn a population against its own leaders. Look at this conflict, Mira said, highlighting one particular war from human history. The humans called it the Vietnam War. A technologically advanced nation attempted to conquer a less developed region. The advanced nation had superior weapons, air superiority, and overwhelming firepower. They should have won easily. What happened? Vex asked, though he suspected he knew the answer. They lost. The less advanced forces used guerrilla tactics, hiding among the civilian population, attacking supply lines, avoiding direct confrontation. The war lasted 20 years. The advanced nation spent enormous resources and lost thousands of soldiers. Eventually, they withdrew because the cost of continuing was greater than any possible benefit. The weaker side won by simply refusing to surrender. Vex studied the data carefully. He saw the parallels immediately. The Krill had superior technology, just like the advanced nation in that human conflict. But technology meant nothing if the enemy refused to fight conventionally. If humans chose to resist the way they had resisted each other throughout their history, occupying Earth would become a nightmare that lasted generations. But there was something else in the data package that disturbed Vex even more. Interspersed with all the records of warfare were records of peace. Not simple cessations of hostilities, but complex processes of reconciliation and reconstruction. He studied the aftermath of what humans called World War II, a conflict so devastating it had killed over 70 million people. The destruction had been total, with entire cities reduced to rubble and nations left in ruins. Vex expected to see the victors enslaving the defeated, as was logical and efficient. Instead, he saw something that made no sense by Krill standards. The victorious nations had helped rebuild the defeated ones. They had provided food, resources, and economic assistance. They had established international organizations designed to prevent future conflicts. Within 30 years, former enemies were trading partners and allies. Within 50 years, they had formed economic unions. The nations that had tried to destroy each other had become integrated to the point where war between them became unthinkable. Why would they do this? Vex asked aloud. Why help your defeated enemies recover? It makes them strong again. It gives them the chance to threaten you in the future. I believe I understand, Commander, said Dr. Lythe, the fleet's cultural analyst. She had been studying the philosophical texts included in the human package. The humans learned something from their thousands of wars. They learned that victory in battle does not mean success in peace. They discovered that conquered people never truly submit. Resentment builds across generations. The cost of maintaining control through force eventually exceeds any benefit gained. Dr. Lythe displayed a quote from a human philosopher on the holographic screen. Peace is not the absence of conflict, but the presence of justice. The humans built lasting peace not by dominating their enemies, but by addressing the underlying causes of conflict, Lythe continued. They created systems where former enemies had a stake in maintaining peace, because peace was more beneficial than war. They turned potential resistors into willing participants. Vex sat down slowly, processing this information. The Krill Empire had never considered such an approach. Their method was simple: conquer, extract resources, maintain control through military presence. Any resistance was crushed immediately. It was efficient and effective, or so they had always believed. Pull up our occupation cost analyses, Vex ordered. I want to see the actual expenses of maintaining control over our conquered worlds. The data appeared, and Vex studied it with growing unease. The Krill maintained permanent military garrisons on 47 worlds. Those garrisons required constant resupply, regular troop rotations, and ongoing military operations against resistance movements. The costs were enormous, but the Krill had always accepted them as the price of empire. But Vex was beginning to see something his superiors had never questioned. The cost never decreased. Even worlds conquered a century ago still required military occupation. The resistance never truly ended. It just changed forms, becoming more subtle but never disappearing. Calculate projections for Earth occupation, Vex said quietly, based on their historical patterns of resistance. Use their own data to predict how they would respond to Krill control. The analysis took 2 hours. When it finished, Vex stared at the results in silence. The projection showed that occupying Earth would require a military presence 3 times larger than any world the Krill currently controlled. The resistance would never be fully suppressed. Humans would fight using every tactic they had developed over 10,000 years. They would sabotage infrastructure, assassinate collaborators, spread propaganda, and wage endless guerrilla war. The occupation would consume resources indefinitely without ever achieving stable control. Commander, we are receiving another transmission from Earth, the communications officer reported. Vex opened the message. It was a simple video communication from a human male wearing a military uniform. The translation protocols identified him as Admiral Marcus Thorne, apparently a leader of Earth's defense forces. Commander Vex, the human said, his voice calm and measured. I am certain your analysts have been studying the information we sent. I hope it has given you a clear picture of who we are and what we are capable of. I want to be very direct with you. We know we cannot defeat you in open combat. Your technology is far superior to ours. If you attack Earth, you will destroy our cities, kill millions of our people, and eventually break our organized resistance. Thorne paused, and something in his eyes made Vex's skin prickle with instinctive recognition. It was the look of someone who had faced death and made peace with it. But we will never stop fighting, Thorne continued. Not in a year, not in a century, not in 1,000 years. We will resist in every way we know how, and we know many ways. We will make your occupation so costly that you will spend more controlling Earth than you could ever extract from it. This is not a threat. This is simply information. We are telling you the truth so you can make an informed decision. The message ended, but another transmission immediately followed. This one was different. Instead of military or political content, it was cultural. Music began playing, complex and emotional compositions that the Krill translation system struggled to interpret. Images flashed across the screen, showing human art, architecture, literature, scientific achievements. The broadcast continued, flowing through different styles and eras, showing the incredible diversity of human creativity. They are flooding all frequencies with this content, the communications officer reported. Thousands of different broadcasts. Music, stories, scientific papers, philosophical texts. It is all being transmitted openly, as if they want us to see everything they have created. Vex watched the cultural broadcasts with a strange feeling growing inside him. He had conquered 63 worlds, but he had never truly studied the species that lived on them. He had seen them as resources to be managed, not as civilizations with their own value. Now he was seeing Earth not as a target, but as a living culture with 10,000 years of accumulated knowledge, art, and wisdom. Commander, the deadline is approaching, Kren reminded him. We need to make a decision. Do we proceed with pacification measures? Vex looked at the data surrounding him. The military analysis showing that Earth could be conquered. The occupation projections showing it would cost more than it was worth. The cultural broadcasts showing what would be destroyed in the process. The human message offering a choice instead of surrender. For the first time in his career, High Commander Vex questioned whether the Krill way was the only way. Perhaps there was something to learn from these strange, violent, creative, stubborn humans who had fought themselves for 10,000 years and somehow learned to build peace from the ashes of war. Open a channel to the Krill High Council, Vex said quietly. Request an emergency session. I need to present new intelligence before we proceed? What will you tell them? Mira asked. Vex looked at the rotating image of Earth on his display, that beautiful blue world that had seemed so easy to conquer just days ago. The truth, he said. That sometimes the strongest enemy is the one who knows exactly what defeat costs and chooses to fight. Anyway, the choice the Krill High Council. Chamber was a massive circular room carved from black stone that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. 12 seats arranged in a perfect circle held the supreme leaders of the Krill Empire, each representing one of the founding colony worlds. High Commander Vex stood in the center of the circle. Projected as a hologram from his flagship orbiting Earth, he could feel the weight of their attention on him. Even across the vast distance of space, Supreme Chancellor Drax spoke first, his voice resonating through the chamber with the authority of 3 centuries of rule. High Commander Vex, you have requested this emergency session with only 6 hours remaining before the ultimatum deadline expires. We expect you are prepared to report Earth's surrender. I am not, Chancellor, Vex said, keeping his voice steady despite the racing of his heart. I am here to recommend we withdraw the ultimatum entirely and pursue a different approach with this species. The silence that followed was absolute. In 300 years of expansion, no Krill commander had ever made such a recommendation. The council members exchanged glances, their expressions ranging from confusion to anger. Explain yourself immediately, demanded Councillor Vex, the military overseer. Your preliminary reports indicated Earth was a standard acquisition target. Primitive technology, divided political structure, no unified defense. What has changed? Vex activated the holographic projectors, filling the chamber with the data Earth had sent. Everything has changed, counselors. Or rather, we have learned what we are actually facing. The humans sent us their complete history. I have spent the past 42 hours analyzing it with my senior staff. What we discovered requires a fundamental reassessment of this operation. He manipulated the displays, showing the timeline of human conflicts. The humans have fought over 15,000 documented wars against each other. They have been in a state of near-constant warfare for their entire recorded history. They have developed military strategy and tactics to a level of sophistication that rivals our own, despite their technological limitations. Then they are violent and primitive, Counselor Viren said dismissively. All the more reason to bring them under civilized control. That was my initial assessment as well, Vex replied. But there is more. The humans did not send us this information to frighten us. They sent it to educate us. Look at this data carefully. Vex pulled up the occupation cost projections his team had calculated. Based on human historical patterns, occupying Earth would require a permanent garrison of 150,000 troops, 3 times our current largest occupation force. The resistance would be ongoing and sophisticated. They would use guerrilla tactics, information warfare, economic sabotage, and political subversion. The projected annual cost of maintaining control would exceed the total resource value we could extract from the planet. Projections can be wrong, Vex argued. Once they see our power, they will submit like every other species, will they? Vex challenged. He displayed records of human insurgencies. Here is a conflict where humans fought for 30 years against an occupying force with superior technology. Here's another where they maintained resistance for 50 years. Here's one where they continued fighting for 3 generations. Counselors, humans do not calculate cost and benefit the way we do. They have a concept they call freedom, and they value it more than their own lives. He showed footage from the cultural broadcasts Earth was transmitting. Music filled the council chamber, strange and beautiful. Images of human art appeared, paintings and sculptures created over thousands of years. Scientific papers demonstrated their growing understanding of the universe. Literature showed the complexity of their philosophical thinking. This is what we would be destroying, Beck said quietly. Not just another primitive species, but a civilization that has accumulated 10,000 years of knowledge and culture. A civilization that has learned lessons we have never considered. Counselor Meyer, the eldest member of the council, leaned forward. What lessons, Commander? Vex displayed the human peace treaties and reconciliation programs. The humans learned something we never have. They learned that conquest creates endless resistance, but cooperation creates lasting stability. after their most devastating war, one that killed 70 million of their people. The victors helped rebuild the defeated nations. Within decades, those former enemies became allies. They created economic unions and mutual defense pacts. They turned potential resistors into willing partners. Weakness, Vex spat. They lacked the will to dominate their defeated enemies. Is it weakness, or is it wisdom? Vex asked. Counselors, I ask you to review our own occupation costs. We maintain military forces on 47 worlds. Those forces have been there for decades, some for over a century. The resistance never truly ends. We spend enormous resources maintaining control over populations that will never willingly submit. What if the humans are right? What if conquest is less efficient than cooperation? Supreme Chancellor Drax raised one hand, calling for silence. Commander Vex, you are proposing a fundamental change to 3 centuries of Krill policy. You suggest we negotiate with this species as equals rather than absorb them into our empire. This is unprecedented. Yes, Chancellor, Vex agreed. But consider what is also unprecedented. For the first time, we face a species that understands the true cost of occupation. They have calculated it for us and sent us the results. They are not begging for mercy or making empty threats. They are offering us a choice based on accurate information. Vex played the message from Admiral Thorne again. The council members watched in silence as the human leader calmly explained that Earth would never stop resisting. Not because they were confident of victory, but because they understood the alternative was worse than death. There's something else you need to know, Vex continued. The cultural broadcasts Earth is sending are not random. They are a test. My communications team analyzed the transmission patterns. The humans are monitoring which broadcasts we access, how long we study each one, which topics generate the most interest from our crew. They are learning about us while we learn about them. Clever, Meyer said with what might have been approval. They are evaluating whether we have curiosity or only conquest in our nature. Exactly, Vex confirmed. And here's what troubles me most. Over the past 42 hours, 17 members of my crew have requested permission to study the human cultural data in their off-duty hours. They are fascinated by human music, literature, and philosophy. In 3 centuries of conquest, I have never seen Krill crew voluntarily study another species' culture. He paused, letting that information settle. The humans are showing us that they have something we lack. Not better technology or superior weapons, but diversity of thought and creativity born from thousands of years of conflict and cooperation. They are demonstrating that they have value beyond the resources of their planet. Counselor Viren stood, his posture aggressive. This is dangerous thinking, Commander. You are suggesting we abandon our expansion because one species sent us some music and stories. The Krill Empire was built on strength, not sentiment. I am suggesting we expand differently, Vex replied. The humans have offered an alternative to conquest. They propose trade partnership, cultural exchange, and mutual defense agreements. They are willing to share their knowledge, including their military strategies and tactical thinking, in exchange for technology transfer and diplomatic recognition. Why would we accept such terms? Vex demanded. We could simply take what we want, could we? Vex challenged. He displayed the military simulations his tactical team had run. My analysis shows we would win the initial battle. We would destroy their orbital defenses, devastate their major cities, and break their organized military. But then what? We would face decades of insurgency. Our ships would be vulnerable to sabotage every time they landed. Our supply lines would be constantly attacked. Our collaborators would be assassinated. Our troops would face an enemy that looks like civilians until they strike. He pulled up more data. And while we are occupied with Earth, what happens to our other conquered worlds? The humans have already made contact with resistance movements on 17 of our occupied planets. They are sharing their tactical knowledge, their strategies for asymmetric warfare, their lessons from 10,000 years of human conflict. If Earth falls, they become martyrs and inspiration for every species we control. If Earth resists successfully, they become proof that the Krill can be defied. The council chamber fell silent as the members absorbed this information. But Vex could see them processing the implications, recognizing the trap that Earth had laid. Win or lose, the Krill Empire would be fundamentally changed by this encounter. Supreme Chancellor Drax spoke slowly, choosing each word with care. You believe the humans have backed us into a position where conquest is possible, but victory is impossible. Yes, Chancellor, Vex confirmed. They have given us a choice. We can conquer Earth and face endless resistance while inspiring rebellion across our empire. Or we can negotiate with them as equals and potentially gain something more valuable than another subjugated world. And what would that be? Drax asked. Innovation, Vex said. The humans learned to build peace after war. They learned to turn enemies into allies. They learned to create value through cooperation rather than extraction through force. These are things we never developed because we never needed to, but perhaps we need them now. Perhaps the model that worked for 3 centuries is reaching its limits. Counselor Meyer stood slowly, her ancient frame moving with deliberate grace. I have served on this council for 170 years. I have overseen the conquest of 29 worlds. I have believed, as we all have, that the Krill Way was the only path to galactic civilization. But I have also watched our occupation costs rise every decade. I have seen resistance movements grow more sophisticated. I have wondered in my private moments whether we were building an empire or a prison. She turned to face the other counselors. Commander Vex is right. The humans have given us a choice, and it is a choice we have never faced before. We can continue as we always have, or we can try something new. I vote to accept the human proposal for a negotiation. This is madness, Vex protested. We are the Krill Empire. We do not negotiate with primitives. They are not primitives, Meyer said sharply. They are survivors of 10,000 years of warfare who learned to build peace. That makes them teachers, if we are wise enough to be students. The vote took 3 hours. Arguments raged across the council chamber. Some members insisted that accepting human terms would show weakness and encourage rebellion. Others argued that the military and economic analysis was clear. Still others suggested that perhaps the Krill Way was not the only way, and learning from another species might strengthen the empire rather than weaken it in the end. The vote was 7-5 in favor of negotiation. It was not unanimous, and the opposition was strong, but it was enough. Supreme Chancellor Drax formally authorized High Commander Vex to begin diplomatic discussions with Earth. Vex returned to his flagship and immediately opened. Communication channel to Earth. Admiral. Thorn appeared on the screen within seconds, as if he had been waiting for this exact moment. Admiral Thorn, Vex said carefully. The Krill High Council has reviewed your proposal. We are prepared to withdraw our ultimatum and begin negotiations for a diplomatic and trade partnership. Thorn's expression remained carefully neutral, but Vex saw the tension leave his shoulders. We are pleased to hear that, Commander. We believe both our civilizations can benefit from cooperation. I have a question, Vex said. You gambled everything on our willingness to think differently. How did you know we would choose negotiation over conquest? Thorn smiled slightly. We didn't know, but we understood something about power that perhaps your empire forgot. True strength isn't the ability to destroy your enemies. True strength is the wisdom to turn enemies into allies. You proved you have that wisdom by making the harder choice. What happens now? Vex asked. Now we talk, Thorn replied. We share knowledge. We learn from each other. We build something better than empire or conquest. We build partnership based on mutual benefit and respect. Over the following weeks, human diplomats traveled to the Krill homeworld. Dr. Elena Rodriguez led the delegation, her lifelong preparation for alien contact finally being put to use. The negotiations were complex and sometimes frustrating. as two species with completely different worldviews tried to find common ground. But slowly, agreements took shape. Technology exchange programs were established. Cultural ambassadors were appointed. Trade routes were opened. Most importantly, a mutual defense pact was signed. Any attack on Earth would be considered an attack on the Krill Empire, and vice versa. The news spread across the galaxy, like ripples in a pond. The Krill, who had built their empire on conquest, had chosen negotiation. Other species began to wonder if change was possible. Resistance movements on occupied Krill worlds saw new hope. The balance of galactic power began to shift in ways no one could predict. 6 months after first contact, Vex stood once again on the observation deck of his flagship. But this time, he was not studying Earth as a target. He was watching as the first human trade ship approached his vessel, bringing goods and knowledge from a species that had taught him the most important lesson of his long career. Sometimes the strongest message is not a threat. Sometimes it is simply the truth. Dr. Rodriguez stepped off the human ship and onto the Krill flagship. She looked around at the assembled Krill officers with a smile that carried both warmth and wariness. This was still new territory for both species, and trust would take time to build. "Welcome aboard," Vex said, extending all 4 of his arms in the Krill gesture of respect. "We have much to learn from each other." "Yes," Rodriguez agreed, returning the gesture as well as she could with only 2 arms. "And much to build together. Thank you for choosing the harder path, Commander. Thank you for choosing wisdom over fear." As humans and Krill began the slow process of building real partnership, Earth continued its broadcasts into space. Music, art, literature, and science flowed outward from the blue planet, carrying a message to that might be listening. A message that said the galaxy did not have to be built on conquest and domination. A message that said cooperation was possible, even between the most different of species. A message that said the future could be better than the past. If beings were brave enough to choose it, the signal that had changed everything was not a threat or a weapon. It was information honestly shared. It was the truth about who humanity was, both their capacity for violence and their hard-won wisdom about peace. It was an offer to learn together rather than fight each other. Comments for next.